of consciousness and nowhere else. There is a perfumed consciousness, but then you will not admit that there is a transformation of the result. Where there is no perfumed place, you turn around and assert that the result exists. Why is this? The opponent replies, Scripture is the reason. That is, if there is only consciousness that appears resembling form, etc. Where there is no form, etc. The Buddha would not have spoken of the sense bases of form, etc. We reply, this teaching is no reason for your position, because it has a special meaning. A verse says, for those beings to be instructed, the world-honored one, with a hidden motive, spoke of the existence of the sense bases of form, etc. In the same way he spoke of beings born spontaneously. The treatise says, this is just like the Buddha speaking of the existence of sentient beings who are born spontaneously. It was said only with a hidden motive regarding the noncessation of mental continuity and its ability to continue on into a subsequent time. He did not say that there are really existent beings who are born spontaneously, because he said, there are no sentient beings or selves, only dharmas and their causes. It is the same when the scriptures speak of the sense bases of form, etc. The Buddha spoke with a hidden motive of there being no separate real existence of sense bases for those beings to be instructed who are fit to receive that teaching. The opponent asks, what is the hidden motive for speaking of the 10 bases of form, etc.? We reply, a verse says, consciousness is born from its own seeds and transforms to resemble characteristics of objects of perception. In order to establish internal and external sense bases, the Buddha spoke of them as being 10. The treatise asks, what does this mean? Answer. Consciousness appearing resembling form is born from its own seeds as a special transformation of the mental continuity and the confluence of conditions consisting of the apparent form and the perceiving aspect of consciousness. On the basis of the seed and the appearing form, the Buddha spoke of the seed and the appearing form as sense bases consisting of eyes and sense bases consisting of form, respectively. In this way. Finally, after skipping over sense bases of sound, smells, and tastes, we come to where consciousness resembling something tangible is born from its own seeds as a special transformation of the mental continuity and the confluence of conditions, consisting of the apparent tangible object and the perceiving aspect of consciousness. On the basis of the seed and the appearing tangible object, the Buddha spoke of them respectively as the sense base consisting of the body and the sense base consisting of tangible objects. With this hidden motive, he spoke of the 10 sense bases of form, etc. Question. What is the special value of this hidden motive? Reply. A verse says, on the basis of this teaching one can enter the teaching of the absence of self of the person. Later, through other teachings, one enters the teaching of the absence of self of the dharmas that are asserted. The treatise says, on the basis of this teaching of the 12 sense bases that are discussed, one who receives instruction is able to enter and grasp the absence of a self in the pujjala. That is, if one thoroughly understands that the 6 consciousnesses i.e. the 5 sense consciousnesses of sight, etc. plus mental consciousness develop from the 6 pair of dharmas i.e. the 12 sense bases and that there is no perceiver or knower at all. Then that person who should receive the teaching of the absence of self in the sentient will be able to awaken to and enter the teaching of the absence of self in the sentient. Later, through other teachings, means the teaching of consciousness only. The one who receives instruction is able to enter the absence of a self in the asserted dharmas. That is, if one thoroughly understands the arising of dharmas that resemble form, etc. as the appearance of consciousness only. And that among these there are not any dharmas with characteristics such as form. The person who should receive the teaching of the absence of a self in dharmas will be able to awaken to and enter the teaching of the absence of a self in all dharmas. Question. If one understands the non-existence of the entirety of dharmas and enters the absence of a self in a dharmas, then consciousness only is also by implication, ultimately non-existent, so how can it be established? Reply. It is not by means of realizing the non-existence of the entirety of dharmas that we speak of entering the absence of self of all dharmas. However, when the absence of self of the dharmas of self-nature and difference that are imagined by the ignorant are penetrated in this way, then it is referred to as entering the absence of self of dharmas. It is not called absence of a self of dharmas because the dharma nature apart from words that is the object of perception of Buddhas does not exist at all. Rather, one speaks of the absence of a self in dharmas because what is grasped by another consciousness other than that of a Buddha is of the nature of consciousness only, and its substance is also non-existent. Otherwise, objects of perception grasped by other consciousnesses would really exist, and the principle of consciousness only would not be demonstrated. Because it is admitted that other consciousnesses have real objects of perception. As a consequence of this reasoning, we speak of establishing the teaching of consciousness only, universally causing one to awaken to and enter the teaching of the absence of self of all dharmas, and not because the entirety of dharmas are rejected as having a nature of any kind. Question. Again, how do we know that the Buddha, on the basis of a hidden motive, said that there are sense bases of form, etc.? Are there no really existing external dharmas such as form, each of which becomes the special object of perception of consciousness of form, etc.? Answer. A verse says, that object of perception is not one thing, nor is it many atoms. Also, it is not a compound, etc. Because atoms are not demonstrated as real. The treatise asks, what is being said? It means that if there are really existing sense bases such as external form, and each sense base acts separately as an object of perception for consciousness of form, etc., then such an external object of perception is either a single thing, as in the Vaisika assertion of a single form with parts, or else it must be many atoms, such as the assertion of really existing multiple atoms, each of which serves as a separate object of perception. Or the object of perception must be a compound or combination of atoms, like the assertion of really existing multiple atoms all uniting and combining to make objects of perception. But that external object of perception must not logically be one thing, because a substance of form possessing parts that is different from the parts cannot be grasped. It also cannot logically be many atoms, because the atoms cannot be grasped individually. Nor, logically, does a compound or combination act as an object of perception, because the principle of a single ultimate atom is not demonstrated as existing. Why is it not demonstrated? A verse says, if an atom is united with 6 other atoms, the one must consist of 6 parts. If it is in the same place with the 6, then the combination must be like a single atom. The treatise says, if each of 6 sides of an atom is united with another atom, the single atom must be made up of 6 parts, because it is not possible for the location of one atom to be in the locations of the others. If there are 6 atoms in the location of one atom, then the combined form must resemble the mass of a single atom, because, being interchangeable, they do not exceed the mass of a single atom, in which case the combined form would be invisible. The Kashmiri Vaibhasika masters say, we do not mean that atoms unite. Atoms have no parts, and therefore we avoid such logical faults as the one above. However, the combined forms possess the characteristics of union, because these combinations do have parts. We reply, this, too, is not correct. A verse says, since atoms do not unite, to what does the union of larger combinations belong? Or else, the uniting of atoms is not demonstrated. It is not because they are devoid of parts. The treatise says, we must now scrutinize this principle and its meaning. Since there is no separate combined form that differs from atoms, then if atoms do not combine, whose combined union is it? If you change your position and try to save it by saying that the development of combined form does not imply union, then you should not say that they do not combine because they are devoid of parts, Because a combination has parts, yet, you do not admit union. The non-union of atoms is not a result of their being devoid of parts. Therefore, not a single ultimate atom is demonstrated. Also, the faults in your reasoning are still the same whether you admit that atoms unite or do not unite. Whether you admit that atoms have parts or do not have parts, both positions are big errors. Why? A verse says, if an atom has parts, it logically would not form a unity. Without parts, there would be no shadow or concealment, and a combination not being different from atoms, it is devoid of the two. The treatise says, the 6 parts i.e. sides of an atom being different, many parts make up its body, so how can they form a unity? If an atom does not have different parts, then how is it that when the sun rises and its light illuminates it, the other side is able to reveal shadow? Since there are no other parts unreached by the light and you are asserting atoms without parts, how can this atom and that atom successively conceal each other from view? And since there are no remaining parts unreached by the other, how can you say that this and that atom successively conceal each other? Since they do not conceal each other, the various atoms must be interchangeable in the same place, and then the combined forms must have the same mass as a single atom. The error is the same as previously mentioned. Question. Why not admit that shadow and concealment belong to combinations but not to atoms? We reply, can it be that you admit that there is combined form that differs from atoms that casts shadows and acts to conceal another form? The questioner says, not at all. We reply, in that case, the combination must be devoid of the two i.e. shadow and concealment. That is, if combined form is not different from atoms, then shadow and concealment must be demonstrated as not belonging to combined form. Arranging and distinguishing, you establish form as atoms or you establish it as a combination of form, but both are unrealities. Question. What is the use of choosing atoms or combination as it? You are still unable to refute the characteristics of external form, etc. We reply, what, again, are these characteristics? The objector replies, objects of perception of eyes, etc. are of the nature of being real colors such as blue, etc. We reply, we must ascertain together whether the true nature of blue, etc. of objects of perception of the eyes, etc. are unitary or many. The opponent says, suppose either is so. What is the problem? We reply, both. Arguments are faulty. The fault of there being many is as explained previously. The position of unitariness is also unreasonable. A verse says, in the case of unity, there would be no piecemeal going. One could arrive and not yet arrive at all times. Nor would there be intervals between many things, or tiny things that are difficult to see. The treatise says that if there were blue, etc. that was without divisions, objects of perception reached by the eyes, etc. would be grasped as single things. There would be no principle of gradually traveling the earth, because by setting down one foot, you would arrive at all places. What is more, at all times, one would be both here and there, without arriving here or not arriving there, because a single thing or single time without divisions.